Tonight, see what truly exists inside the world of the paranormal. Inside. Join the discussion and review some of the best paranormal evidence captures from a wide variety of experienced and up-and-coming investigators. See and hear what they capture, where they captured it, and how they captured it. Right now on Entity Voices Paranormal Evidence.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Entity Voices Paranormal Evidence. We're us.
Yeah,
we're us. We is we.
That's the opening apology.
Hello.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back.
Yeah.
Where's our audience? We only have 8 people.
What they geek. But they're important people.
That's right.
Oh, now it's coming up. 10. Come on, guys.
They heard Cherie yelling.
Yeah, shut up.
We're doing EVP over here.
We're doing
EVPE.
Wait, did it just drop to 1 or is that 11? Oh my
11.
God. Okay.
It went up.
How was everyone's weekend?
Fun. Long weekend for me. 4 days.
Good. Nice.
4.5.
Yay.
Yeah.
Yes.
You can't count yourself.
Still short.
I had 1, then I went back to work, then I had 2.
Same
then I
here.
went back to work.
Same here.
Same here. Yeah. I wasn't off on Friday.
Yeah, that was I.
Aw, I feel bad for you guys.
Yeah, you seem like it.
I know.
As we all frown and she's laughing. Oh, I feel bad for you guys.
Yeah. We can sense your empathy.
Yes, it's overflowing.
Yeah. So much so it's gone.
Yeah, that's right. Right out the door.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, everybody.
Let's address the missing individual.
Yes, where's
Audra.
Audra?
We leave on Saturday for vacation, and Audra has been miserable for 2 days.
Uh-oh.
Her stomach is not doing good, and she was going to try and force herself to come on because we won't be here next week because we're on vacation, and then we're all off, no live for 2 weeks after that, and she didn't want to be gone for that long, but I told her, get your ass to bed. You're not coming on tonight because she would have just been miserable sitting here all night long. So.
Yeah, health always comes first.
Yep.
What?
Well, I'm happy. I hope that she feels better soon. Is what I mean to say.
Yes.
Yeah.
Be ready for that vacation.
Yeah, she needs to get ready for that vacation. She better get ready quick.
Yeah, I told her if she's not feeling well by the time we get to Anna Maria Island is where we're going in the Gulf of Mexico. It's a key off the coast just north of Siesta Key. And I told her if you don't feel good by the time we get there, I'll just keep you drunk the whole time, so we'll be good.
There's the big question from
That's the next white elephant in the room.
Yeah, that is.
Look at the screen.
who you slept with.
Oh.
Yeah, show them what your shirt says, Lourdes. Bring the ratings up.
Kind of.
It's Shanley. It's kind of hard because the bench is there, and I'm kind of.
It says the back just says the spirits are in, but
Yeah.
I slept with the spirits at, and then the back says the Shanley, which we were just at the Shanley Saturday night.
Very cool.
With some of the folks in the chat, Anthony Seminelli, who just got here, Jenny Colucci, Todd and Chameleon, aka Carmela, Maureen Brzezinski ran.
What's amazing is they asked what your shirt said, and when you went like this, our viewers jumped about 30 people.
No.
We'll keep doing it. I'll do it if it helps.
It went down when I did it, Ron, so let's not try to.
Oh my goodness.
Whatever it takes. This will be the un-XXX network.
That's right. We did get kicked from Facebook. I don't know if you guys saw my message.
Yeah, I saw the disclaimer when I logged in said that it wasn't connected. They lost connection.
Yeah. Anywho.
That's all right.
Yeah. Why would Facebook want to have free content?
So go on YouTube, folks. And anybody that you know that usually watch us, tell them go on YouTube.
I know, it's really silly. Like I shared the post and we're live tonight, live on YouTube. Like we're posting on Facebook to go see us somewhere else
I
instead of
know.
the viewers being there.
Doesn't make sense.
Do you think
Right.
Facebook would be okay with that?
Oh well. Good
Roger.
evening,
Just
Roger
that Facebook, YouTube,
and Melissa.
that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh,
No, not tonight.
The good news is all the promos that you guys saw on Facebook, if you click on those, it'll bring you right to YouTube.
Yeah, that's what we shared them. I mean, we love going live on multiple platforms, but
Until they stop us from doing that, I don't know.
It's like going to the bus station to catch a train. It's not a big deal.
no.
No snap, it's Monday, right? See, Ash said the word. Ash said the word.
It's okay to say it now, but whoever, and I'm not going to mention any names, Lourdes, but somebody said "Happy Monday" like this morning, and I was like, "Oh."
But Cherie said it first.
Oh, I didn't see Cherie.
I dropped dime. Sorry, I tattletales.
That's awesome. Well, we got a really interesting show for you guys tonight.
Do we now?
This isn't a let's show you an investigation, let's show you evidence. Tonight, we're going to have a panel discussion, and our panel discussion is going to be the five of us because Audra's not here.
Yeah.
And our topic tonight is after-death communication. And I did a little research before the show, and after-death communication, according to studies done by scientists, no shit, interviewing people that have had experiences, paranormal investigators, mediums, people that dwelled in the paranormal, and they categorized them as different categories. It's visual, auditory, tactile, sense of presence, olfactory, dream, symbolic, deathbed visions, and telephone. Now, for anybody that doesn't understand what tactile is touching, being touched. You're touched by spirit. You're touched by during an investigation, and the olfactory is your senses. Your sense of smell. So being able to smell something like Audra and I experienced at the USS North Carolina, where we actually in the mess hall smelled the food cooking, and they had cooked food there since 1957. And what's ironically enough is they actually did a study with all these people, and relative distribution of the after-death communication across the senses was 46% visual, 44% auditory, 48% touch, 28% olfactory, and 34% sensing the presence of the deceased without the input of the five senses. So third eye. That's science way of saying your third eye without saying your third eye because they don't believe it exists, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Go ahead,
Sorry.
Tony.
I was just going to say it's interesting, when you talk about studies from, and I don't know whether this is parapsychologists or what type of science, but it's just I find it almost amusing that materialistic science says, when the body dies, life's over, but yet you still got branches of the same organization going after and researching, which is what science actually is supposed to do. So I guess now I take it back. That's what they're supposed to do is find.
A couple of the articles that I, referring to what you're talking about, a couple of the articles that I actually read that they did the studies, of course, it was psychology.
Right.
The purpose of the study to begin with was to disprove it. And
Right.
they ended up actually not disproving it. They actually proved that it actually does exist. And these people are 100% positive that these experiences happened.
Yeah, I kind of answered my own question when I tried to explain it.
Yeah, and plus too, one of the things I like to try to do along the way tonight is like when we give names to things, which language compels us to do for the purposes of discussing them, there isn't actually a third eye. So maybe at some point we can clarify what's being referred to when saying third eye, because it's almost it's an appeal to a sensory input method, so to speak. I guess it's not actually an eyeball that didn't hit the surface, right? So that might be good, though that would be creepy.
Like a third nipple.
Yeah. So that might be good to get into. And I was going to say the same thing, that when science investigates that stuff, they're looking for causal properties. They're looking for explanations behind how it happens. And most certainly, because of science and how it operates, looking for ways that it's able to measure and predict it. And that's where you get a lot of the probably a lot of the input maybe from parapsychology, where they're looking for causal things that have to do with the brain. And then also, what was the other thing that I had it a second ago? I lost it and it came back and I lost it again. Like, there's so much to this. When after that, and then Tony had mentioned something about, what did you refer to again?
Well, my original question was how somebody who doesn't believe that when the body dies, brain dies, consciousness dies, what they'd be looking for. But I answered my own question. In fact, that true science looks to reveal what they can find, not what they necessarily believe. But
I got it. Yeah. The other thing, I know what it is now. I wanted to clarify too, is for the purposes of explanation for the show, science measures and predicts behaviors and regularities in nature. That's what it does. It doesn't speak to ontology, which is a study of being, or the beingness of something, which is a philosophical argument. So science is not synonymous with materialism. Materialism is an ideology. Materialism is an ontology. It's a lot of the people who are in science, because of the way science operates with being able to measure and predict things, subscribe to or are materialists. So often agnostic materialists, many times atheists. But materialism is not analogous to or part and parcel with science.
It's actually a philosophy.
Yeah.
It's a philosophy.
There's two different things. There's one that philosophy studies the nature of being or reality.
Materialism, yeah.
And materialism is one belief in that. Now, most scientists, or a lot of scientists at least, are materialists. But then you run into explanatory problems like hard problem of consciousness, which we can get into during the show. But I mean, it's silly to think that, and we know with sight and sound that there's things outside of what our senses can pick up. So it's silly to assume that there's beyond what we can sense and pick up, nor that we're primates running around on a rock with higher cognitive function for 30 to 50,000 years. Why would we be able to pick up every single thing that's in reality? Of course, there's things outside of what we can pick up. It's not necessary for survival. Why would we have evolved anything that would give us a sight, sound, tap into every aspect of reality? So it's safe to assume that what we think is out there beyond our senses, that there is something out there. I think it makes sense.
Well, and then we also got to think about, do we call it reality, or do we call it our current perception?
Well, they're both, those kind of are synonymous, because your reality is your perception. If you don't perceive fire, you don't have an experience that includes fire. That's not your reality. And your reality is always in the now. So,
well, I agree with that completely. But then you've got to assume that because our senses are limited, then there's a lot more to reality than what our senses can understand or perceive.
Precisely.
Therefore, when we know our sight's limited, we know our hearing's limited, those two alone make up a huge proportion of the five senses. So if I can't see everything and I can't hear anything, there's got to be a lot more to what reality truly has or exists compared to what I can perceive from.
Yeah, I agree. And that's what I was getting at. I think it's silly to assume that we can pick up every salient thing of everything to do with reality. Why would we?
Right.
So it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? When we talk about the dashboard with the dials that are picking up information for the pilot, like our senses do for the environment around us, if the dials aren't reading anything, it doesn't mean the world isn't out there. It means it's not measuring anything.
Right.
Well, let's take a minute and go by these categories one by one and compare it to us as investigators and those that are watching as investigators and researchers. What falls into each category? So let's discuss visual. What would fall into the visual category?
Apparition.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Moving
Apparition you
object.
see, right? Apparition you see, shadow figures, anything caught on video, anything caught on camera that can't be explained, right?
Correct. Moving object.
Yep.
Um,
Paranormal activity can also be considered visual.
correct.
Paranormal activity.
Which can be any number of things. Can we
Yeah,
ask
that's not the word I meant.
first consciousness, physical?
Yeah, those are two different things. If you're asking, well, so materialism is a belief that there's an actual physical 3D world out there that exists outside of consciousness. That's what materialism says. If you're asking what came first or what existed first, physical matter in a physical solid world or consciousness, that's the argument that we make with our team, is that consciousness would have to have primacy.
Yep.
Because they know from at least 40-something years of quantum mechanics that there is no physicality without measurement. So if you can't have something physical without measurement, you can't measure something without perception, and perception is an experiential state, right? That's something that you have through consciousness.
Right. And you have
to have primacy.
right, because you have to have the experience before you can measure or identify when that occurred.
Yep.
So, I was thinking about a show we did recently, Ron, where, I was trying to explain the fact when the question was coming up about, where is this communication coming from? Mm-hmm. And where do they say that they are? Where are they? And I remember we asked one time and they said you wouldn't understand and gave all sorts. But I've been thinking about that a lot lately. And that would be like me saying, without using human constructed time, Ron, when was the last time you had a beer? But you can't use time. It's impossible.
Right.
It's impossible.
Right.
You can't say 6 hours ago. You can't say yesterday. You can't say 4 weeks ago or whatever. You can't use any of that because that's all the human construct of time. So identifying that simple answer, when was the last time you enjoyed a beer, it literally becomes impossible and absolutely cannot be defined or understood.
That's a brilliant point because in philosophy it's called question begging. When the answer is inherent in the question being asked, like it's already accepted.
Right.
So that's what that is. That would be question begging. You cannot define and explain time or space without using the words or something that is a synonym for the words.
Right.
It's impossible.
That's why it's difficult because when there's that belief that they have no time and space, and then someone asks you, "Well, where where are they?"
Right.
There's no time and space, and to be honest,
but I was having a hard time wrapping my head around why they couldn't say, "Well, we're." But then I started thinking about, trying to explain when was the last time you enjoyed a beer. You can't use hours. You can't use weeks. You can't use last. How do you say that? You can't.
And even before the measurement of time was invented, if you'd have asked that question, they'd have said, 2 moons ago, 2 suns ago. So they still had some measurement.
That's
time.
Yeah.
Correct. But again, all human constructs, meaning time is complete. The calendar completely developed by man. The watch, all of it. So trying to say something like, "Well, I had the beer just." You just froze. You're absolutely froze.
No, that's absolutely true. And we talked about it on that one show too, because a lot of people will think that the fabric of reality is space-time. But space and time are both what? They're both the appearance of cognitive proximity, right? And if they're experiential, you can't have experience without being conscious. So consciousness has to have primacy over space and time, right? So they're not the scaffolding that reality sits on. Consciousness is the scaffolding upon which everything else would rest.
Correct, because the experience you have then is dictated by whether that happened right now, yesterday, that experience then gets placed into that construct of time and space.
Yeah.
You can't place something in it that never happened.
Right. And so this
doesn't come.
Right. This is another thing. If you look at Karen's question, and we're going to try to hit these things head on the best we can, as well as Ronald put about that he believed that human spirits were conceived were made at the time. So when you look at cosmology and an origin story for the universe, it's always from a perspective of when we would have been, or humans would have been, perceiving it. It's not the actual start of everything. So when you're looking at cosmology, that's usually where the target is the beginning of time for humanity, or how far we think living species or sentient beings would go back. And were they made at the time the universe was created? There's really no way to know that. That will always be, I think, speculative and couched within a belief. But
I believe her questions that I was asking about different places in consciousness.
That's his, right. And that's the other, right.
Yeah.
You want to address
so,
that one?
Yeah. Well, I believe we're all in the same position here, or believe that we're immersed in it. They're all around us. The only reason we can't see them is because we have, like Tony says, the veil is our bodies. This is the boundary that stops us from seeing them. That's why if you meditate, some people, when they meditate, they'll start hearing from fans and water. They are all around us. But the only reason why we think they're in another place is because we can't see them with the bodies that we have.
Right. And so this is the thing that we try to do too, where we label things again. So why are they in two different places? We don't know that they are. Right. And when we argue for the idea of analytic idealism, with consciousness being the foundation for reality, that's the foundation. Then everything else is within consciousness. So when we say we're dissociated from each other, which is why we can't read each other's minds, and we're not of one mind, even though we come from one mind, you have to see that through as an ontology if you buy into it. And so as soon as you start carving out different places, right? Because we do that, we carve out different places, even with our reality, right? You go, all right, I need a car, right? And in order to have a car that works, I need to have a carburetor. So the carburetor is part of the car, but the car also needs tires for the tire to go. So the tires are part of the car, but the tires also need a road to grip, or the car won't go anywhere. So the road is part of the car, and without gravity to hold the tires to the road for them to grip, now the road is part of the car. See how it keeps going? So we arbitrarily carve things out in reality so that we can refer to them and differentiate things. But if you go with that, everything can be connected to everything, because there's one, we believe, universal consciousness.
And if the human body doesn't allow you to see them or hear them, they could be right here. We just are absolutely shielded from all of it and wouldn't know.
Well, here's a perfect example. Well, a perfect analogy. So you're sitting in a room with another person side by side in a chair, and somebody places a sheet between the two of you. Are you in two different places, or can you not just perceive the person next to you?
That's a great example.
Yeah.
That's a great example, right? You haven't created another location. You've created a boundary.
Correct.
Which is what we say.
Which is this. That's why we can't see them. We're all in the same place. They're all over, but we can't see them because we have this body that helps us to navigate this world, or not, we'll die. So, but they're with us all the time.
Neshoba's not wrong. That is one of the ideas, that it is similar to a dream. But when you dream, this is why we see it different. When you dream, you still identify as yourself. You don't identify as the other people, the cars, the buildings, the roads. You separate yourself. You're dissociated in the dream. You are you, and everything else is separate. So in real life, it's the same thing. You're you, and everything else is separate. Except when you're dreaming, it's all you. It's all you, but you dissociate from it. So we feel like, as one universal mind, in reality, it's all part of the same thing, but we're dissociated from it.
And you know what's interesting? There is a movie that Corey Feldman and Corey Haim did together that is a perfect example of this. And I don't know if you guys think,
I was about to say that, Tony.
No, tell me if you guys have seen it. It's called Dream a Little Dream.
I've heard of it. I don't know if I saw it.
I haven't seen it.
I'm not
So
sure if I've seen it.
ultimately, the story is this old couple are practicing a Zen technique, which relieves their consciousness away from their physical body because they're getting older. The old man doesn't like the fact that they're restricted on doing things. So they're doing this meditation type thing where they're pulling their consciousness away from their physical body so they can spend time together and not have the boundaries of the physical body, which is starting to fail on them.
Imagine how do they do that? Like, you know.
Well, they were in such a meditative state, they were pulling their consciousness away. And it doesn't explain it to this depth in the movie, but if you've ever watched it, it's one of my favorite movies of all time because it actually relates senses to the paranormal world, and you don't really know it. It's just a plot that somebody put together, but you guys know how I am. I read deep into things. I always look beneath the surface. But Corey Feldman and another girl character are running outside at the same time, and they run into each other and knock themselves out. And the consciousness from the old couple transfer into the young couple. And then the two younger kids are lost somewhere in this vast consciousness. And the whole movie is based around that. And it's almost a good example of this, minus the Hollywood plot and all the other crap that goes with it. But the separation of consciousness, how we're all in the same place, they were inside the house, the kids were outside the house, but that consciousness connected during that sense of meditation where they pulled their consciousness out. And they don't physically say this, but if you watch the movie, it very much relates to the subject we're talking about.
Yeah,
and I won't go deeper into it, but if you can find the movie, find it. It's actually pretty cool for people that are in the paranormal.
That's one of those instances when Hollywood makes some things that don't really have any empirical foundation at all seem plausible. But you can't remove consciousness from a person. We're within consciousness. Consciousness is not within us. That would be materialism. It says that consciousness is created by your brain, so it's in each individual, and it's separate like that. But that's why people believe that you can upload your consciousness to a computer and then store it somewhere. But there's no reason to. We have no reason to believe that whatsoever. But science fiction has made it seem plausible.
Yes. Well, you see it. You see it like even in the Marvel movies where they pulled the one guy's consciousness out of his body and put it into the system, and it continues to control things 50, 70, 100 years into the future. It's not physically possible. If that
no, I mean they could,
time, yeah.
I mean, even like Ron used to talk about that computers can replicate a kidney down to the molecular level, but it's not a kidney. It'll never be a kidney. It may be able to replicate every single function down to the atomic level, but it's not a kidney. Just like uploading somebody's consciousness to a computer, not going to be consciousness.
Right.
Same with
AI.
You
couldn't even upload a consciousness. You wouldn't be able to attain something that would be consciousness contained as a thing to upload anywhere. Yeah, and what you said is absolutely the case. You can replicate kidney function down to a molecular level, but it doesn't mean your computer's going to pee on your keyboard.
Right.
Because the simulation is not the thing simulated.
But your dog will do it for you, Cherie, so don't worry.
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
To Todd and Carmela's thing, Matrix, are we in one? There's thoughts in floating around out there that something akin to that could be what's going on, but not with a computer that some mastermind or somebody is controlling, because then it would have to be larger than everything to be able to run a simulation. It's not. That's another sci-fi makes it seem plausible thing.
Right, but from a Matrix standpoint of you're believing what you're seeing because of your perception intake, even we agree from analytic idealism that we're not necessarily seeing reality. We're seeing our interpretation of it, which in that form, it is a Matrix effect.
Kind of, yeah. And it's not so much, I guess it's not, I wouldn't, if I'd hesitate, would you say interpretation? It's not wrong, but it's how reality represents itself to us, and then we perceive it that way. And that's the one argument for the fact that we can say that we share a world. Why do we think we share a world? Because if we were all in this house, we would all perceive the environment the same. You wouldn't see the walls as blue and we see them as white, right? So there's a world out there, and it's how it represents itself to us that we perceive.
Right.
But we don't individually have the volition to change the environment and experience something different at the same place.
No, but I understand what Tony's saying. The foundation of the movie, as far as the reality, like I could see it as a matrix. It's just, it's not computerized, and it's not, you know.
No, I mean, I'm not talking from the movie. And I agree with you, Ron, completely. But from the fact that we're limited to the sensory input that we have, our sight, which is limited, our hearing, which is limited, touch, taste, smell, all limited. So therefore, we're limited in what we can perceive and interact with. And that's probably done just so that we can function day to day and understand and get through each day of life. But it's still only a physical representation of what probably really exists, or a fraction of what exists, if what we perceive even truly is what we perceive. Now, I agree we all perceive it similarly, but that doesn't mean, like, when I see the kitchen table, that kitchen table is exactly as I perceive it. That's the matrix I'm talking.
Yeah, I understand.
I don't. Gives me headache.
So let's go back to where Ron had talked about the third eye. We need to identify what we mean by the third eye.
Yeah.
The third eye is the ability to sense, hear, smell, taste things that aren't in what we perceive as our physical world, without the ability of our senses. So not the perfect definition, but the definition that I can bring to you right now is like a medium. How do we verify that we can see, hear, is communicating with spirits? What we do is we collect the data through EVPs and stuff like that to confirm it. But that's what I mean by the third eye, is being able to sense and know and hear something without using any physical ability connected to it.
I mean, it's also
intuition
termed, a sixth sense, meaning it's not sight, sound, hearing, smell, touch. It's a sixth sense of awareness.
Intuition.
Yeah.
And six meaning one more than five, not sixth sense like Audra's feeling. Not like that.
Yeah, no, not like six.
Sixth sense.
Yeah.
It's that extra sensory perception.
Correct.
Yes.
Right. Right, which is intuiting the information. And if we did not dialogue to ourselves with language in our own heads, then everything we perceived would be intuition.
Right.
Correct. Now, here's something interesting. In after-death communication, I wanted to bring this one up because I found it when I was doing the research. A psychologist actually did and I'll share the screen with you. Let me show this.
Cool.
He actually did a study at King's University in Canada, because telephone is listed as one of those after-death communications. So this is the gentleman that did the study. His name is, I'm not even going to act like I can fucking pronounce this, but it's Dr. Emmett Barus. He's a professor of psychology. So he spent almost $50,000 doing a study on cell phones as a form of afterlife communication.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about this before the show. It's like, for example, those of you that have ever watched Project Fear, and Ron and Lourdes have a good explanation of this. Project Fear, there was an episode where Tanner had left his cell phone in his backpack in the command center, and it was just the six of them. There was nobody else or five of them. 1, 2, 3, 4 of them. However many, I can't count right now. They were the only ones in the building, and they were separated in the building. And one of the hosts, Alex, received a phone call from Tanner, and there was nothing. He picked it up. There was a bunch of static. There was nothing there. Tanner didn't even have his phone. It was in his backpack. So that would be a form of this communication. And then what was your example again, Lourdes and Ron?
Well, I've read reports on people getting communications with their cell phones, and there's a number, but they can't call back the number. And it's usually like a 3-4 digit number and maybe a symbol like the pound sign, but you can't call the number back. And it's usually static. They'll get static, or perhaps a loved one, what they perceive to be their loved one. But it's a lot of times it's static with staticky sound.
Yeah.
Usually, accompanies it. But yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know if it was the Knights of Columbus or Elks Club or whatever it was. Remember when we did with Fashion Launch magazine with Anthony Simonelli? Yeah. And Anthony's phone was in his pocket, and it called, what was the woman's name?
I forget which
one.
Who
ran it? He'll know, put it in the chat. It called her phone. They were both sitting at the table. Both of their phones were put away. Her phone starts ringing in the middle of a session. She takes it out, and she goes to Anthony. She goes, "You're calling me." And his phone wasn't even in his hand. It was in his pocket.
Her last name is Foley.
Yeah, Sandy Foley.
Sandy Foley. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean that kind of stuff happens. There's books, Phone Calls from the Dead by Rogo, was it Rogo and Bayless, and then Cal
Cooper just wrote one.
He re-released, I think, another version or updated version of his not Phone Calls from the Dead, but it's a similar title.
They would do it with computers.
Rogo and Bayless, right?
Back in the days with computers, regular phones from back in the days. They would get spirit communication.
Yeah, telephone calls from the dead, right?
Yeah,
that's Cal's. So yeah, it happens. And so just to take it to the extreme, when we say that reality is mental under analytic idealism, one of the things that's very difficult until you're thinking through that lens for a while is to not revert back to looking at the world that it's physical and material and standalone physical stuff outside of consciousness. It's hard not to go back there, but if you do look at it consistently through the lens of reality being mental processes or thought, or as Schopenhauer called it, will, right? Not our thoughts, not your thoughts, but just mental process, right? Just the same way my thoughts are objective to you, thoughts out there as the basis for reality would also seem objective to us. So if everything out there is mental, and then what we perceive as physical is a representation of what's actually out there, then there is no phone. The phone is a representation of something else. So for something to manipulate the phone, whether it's using an app or a phone call, it's mental stuff mixing with mental stuff. And we know that happens all the time because our thoughts and emotions both influence each other every day. You don't have a conflict. Otherwise, if you say that the phone is this physical solid thing that exists outside of consciousness that we perceive in all of its physical measurements, if you look at it that way, then you have to explain a whole bunch of stuff. How is it dialing? What triggered the mechanism? What came through? What connected to it on the frequency it's on? And it's endless questions you have to try to explain it with. But if it's mental and it's a representation of something else, then it's mental stuff mixing with mental stuff, influencing or impinging upon your mental stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and we've said numerous times too that when the communication comes through, whether it be spirit or another consciousness that's trying to connect with us, it will do or use any tools it takes to get your attention. And if your perception is that your cell phone is important to you and that consciousness is trying to connect with you and send you a message to your consciousness, it might use your perception to something that's going to grab your attention, right? So it reaches out through your cell phone because it knows that when it tries to communicate with you and it comes through the cell phone, that's the first thing you're going to grab, when in reality, it's just a straight communication through a consciousness, right?
Right.
And for Mary Beth's question, the reason why we feel pain, because if you think about mental stuff mixing in with mental stuff, so if you have, make believe this is a knife, and you cut yourself and you feel the pain, the knife is a mental state that is mixing in with your mental states, and then it influences you and you feel pain. That's why you feel pain.
Right.
And if that makes, but let me see if I can get the reason why we believe that this is solid is because there's it's groupings of little tiny energy waves at them, and there's strong forces of attraction so strong that it convinces us that this is solid. but it's really a mental state, and it feels solid because of the sensory inputs that we have. But the reason why you feel pain is because it's mental stuff influencing mental stuff.
Right. That's that explanation. That question too is the reason why people think that there's actual physical standalone stuff, because they feel like physicality has primacy because something physical touches you and then it creates an emotional or an experiential state. So physical triggered emotional, hence physical has primacy. But if the knife is just a representation of mental processes and it's one mental thing affecting another mental thing, the same way if I feel angry, it might make you feel uncomfortable. Those are both experiential states.
That brings up a memory of mine. We were at Mary's in Payson. What's the name of that bar?
Dead horse, wild horse, something horse. Holy crap! I can't remember it either.
Got something to do with horses.
Anyway, I got
Oxbow
Saloon.
I'm not even fucking close.
You were horse, ox, it's
an animal.
Close. But anyway, I got slapped or pushed. I don't remember which one.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't the first time, but it was solid and shook me up a little bit. But I remember talking to my dad, who of course, physicist. So he started asking me questions, and he said, well, the theory behind how an object gets moved is that energy is built up in a reaction. When that reaction, that motion collides with another object, you have the law of inertia, which transfers that energy to the other object, which then propels that object to keep that motion in play. He says, I understand all that, but he says, how do you get pushed when there's no hand to push you? So I said to him, well, what happens when my arm moves? Mentally, I make my arm move. That arm then builds up energy to push. That energy gets transferred to my body, and my body gets shoved. Why do I need the arm? If they're energy, why can't they just have that energy do the interaction of the arm that would have been there? And he went,
Yeah.
But that's a real good example of what you're referring to.
Yeah, absolutely.
The bigger question is did you really feel an arm, or was that a perception of an arm? Because that's
the perception was just the push,
right?
Not the arm. Just like if somebody had come up from behind me and went, it was the lunge forward. Sorry, didn't mean that. But I don't need a physical arm to do that. If spirits are energy and they can create that energy and have it interact like a moving arm would, to use the law of inertia to have that energy transfer from what would have been an arm to my shoulder to lunge me forward, they don't actually need the arm if they're energy. Just send that energy and boom, I get shoved forward.
It's actually interesting you say that, Tony, because you've been with me when I've experienced being touched and I get pissed.
Okay, a couple of times I remember that.
And I've talked about being sensitive before with everybody, but this is the first time I've actually gone into this much depth. I sense energy. And the reason I get upset when I get touched in an investigation is because I feel the perception of the hand and the ice cold feeling of something being touching me. But the part that bothers me the most and the reason I get so emotional is because it's a shock wave. It's like a disruption of energy, and I don't like it. So it's the same concept. It's energy disrupting energy. That's why I get upset when I get touched on an investigation, because it's a shock wave. It's not because I can feel a hand and there's nobody standing there. It's not that I'm scared that I'm responding that way. It's a disruption of my energy with another energy, and I don't like it.
No, I remember that from the EM pump that I turned on in the hallway.
He still makes fun of me to this day.
See, my experience when we did the oxbow, it's not about like somebody touches me. It's not a touch. I got poked twice, as in
3 times, I think.
yeah, I can't remember, but twice I got poked. It's kind of like a needle poke in my leg, my right
I
leg,
remember
and
that.
it made me like
Jump
and I'm like, ouch! It happens to me twice.
2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
Once
Now-
inside, then you scream twice out.
Now, think about the same concept. Is it a poke, or was it a centralized focus disruption of the energy in your leg?
See, the only thing I can remember, it's kind of like a needle, big needle, and it's just stabbed me.
You can probably understand it better, Chris, because of your abilities and your sensitivity to it, whereas maybe myself or Cherie just feels the reaction of the energy and not the whole presence of what you're feeling, the presence and the energy disruption and the influence, whereas we just feel the physical reaction to
Perception.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and it gets deep too, because again, if we stick to, and she's smiling, she knows where I'm going.
Okay.
If we stick to idealism, there is no physical, so it's not like energy is being conducted through something physical. It's mental mentation or mental processes interacting with another mental processing.
So now this is what made me so hard for me to understand about this whole thing, consciousness and everything. You guys know that. I'm having okay. So if if somebody like touches you or poke you or whatever, would that be a consciousness or paranormal or what?
Well, everything is mental, meaning
Okay, so it's not a paranormal, it's a mental.
well, 2 different subjects.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the fact that our entire life, our entire existence, our entire perception is all mental and subjective, meaning it is what we experience, what we understand is happening. When Lourdes said if a knife cut her arm, it's mental interrupting mental. Well, does the knife have mental abilities? No, it doesn't. But the knife to you is a mental thought of what it is. So that's the concept of life is mental, meaning if I see a big rock falling over a cliff and heading towards me, it's the mental idea that rock's going to cause some damage. And that rock to me is a mental construction of, I know its weight, I know its speed, I know it's coming at me. All of that, every subjective experience is only based on your mental perception of the world around you.
So it's not a paranormal.
Well,
I was gonna say, so the rock and the knife are within consciousness,
right.
but they don't have consciousness. They're just
Right.
within it.
Right.
And if you are flying under the analytic idealism, then it's all normal. It's Tony touching you is normal. If a spirit touches you, it's normal, because everything is mental states.
Correct. But I still don't want to be hit by the rock.
Right.
So Ron, with your vast understanding of the analytic idealism, I've got a question. So,
Sure.
Is what we sense, or let me try and put this a different way. Is it because that we're all part of we have separated into individual consciousnesses? Is that a fucking word? Consciousnesses?
No, that's too many.
God bless me. Sorry, I sneezed. So we've all broken off into individual consciousness, right? Kind of like split personalities type situation off of one consciousness, right?
Yes. One mind.
Is that disruption that we feel less of a perception and more of our consciousness that is split off from the main consciousness feeling invaded? I don't know if I'm saying this right. I had the thought in my head.
I think I know what you're saying, and I think that's where the idea of that third eye or sixth sense or extrasensory perception probably originates from. Because even though we are born in this life, we're a child, and then we grow up and people tell us, oh, that doesn't exist and this doesn't happen. But somewhere in that consciousness is still the knowledge of what it came from. And therefore probably brings up a lot of the questions of, now I can't remember what Chris said. I apologize.
Oh, no, you're okay.
The
So
disturbance.
what I was saying was, is do we feel like it's a disturbance into our separation of consciousness?
Oh, that's right. Thank you.
Territorial consciousness is what I'm trying to say.
I would say to some point it could be, because if we came from universal consciousness and all knowledge and are then sort of broken off from it and put into a body that has limited perception, somewhere in there, which is why past life regression can bring out abilities in people that they didn't have, playing piano, doing all sorts of things. That knowledge is still there, which is why I think a lot of people look for answers, because somewhere in the back, they know there's more. That's just a personal opinion.
I agree with that. Again, it's difficult not to slip back into a materials like mindset, but there's no body to slip into. The body is the appearance of the dissociation to somebody else. So if we're of one mind and we are alters or separate individual centers of identity within the one mind, our individuated state is what the body and everything is what it appears like from us across a dissociative boundary. So you perceive me as this because this is how my boundary looks at, and we have perception. We have we say the dashboard or a wall perception upon which our senses and everything give us input of the world around us. So everything we perceive is through that, but we can have feelings that come from inside that are endogenous. If you're in a room with no sight, sound, smell, nothing, you can still feel fear or you can still have fantasies, right? Because those are internal endogenous states, but they're still experiential states. The big hurdle, and this is something that even that I've been studying this for a couple of years, I still struggle with it. It's so easy to slip back into a dualistic mindset to say that there's mind and that there's matter, or there's mind and that there's body. The body is the appearance of your dissociated state. So one mind, universal, and then we're all separated from it, and our senses pick up information from around us, which is why we have separate experiences, but we all have our own separate phenomenal inner conscious life that's separated through the dissociation. And then part of what happens in consciousness is that we have something that enforces the boundary. And when you die, that boundary, or when people go into altered states, the boundary is either more permeable or weakened.
That's I was getting the
Go ahead, take it.
Go ahead. Continue it. That was go ahead.
I can stop now. Run with it.
Well, with as far as the third eye and sensing things that are not there under analytic idealism is probably more probable. Is that the right word? Or possible that that individual becomes more porous and is able to receive more information at that moment. Some people may be able to control it, and when there's some other people can't. And usually, if they control it, they got to do the breathing and everything, which then makes them more porous to receive just a little bit more information. And that's like the third eye, or things like that, sensing things and being even touched and things like that.
Perception is questionable. You could say that. I mean, but that's how we know anything. Everything we know, directly or indirectly through acquaintance, is through experience. And if it's not perceived, you can't measure it or experience it in any other way. So perception is definitely where we start.
So you, Chris, are more porous to information than other people.
Mm-hmm.
That's you. Like it's almost, and this is just me trying to figure out a way to describe it. It's like you just have that opening just a little more than other people, where you can receive some information. Whether some
and what you said a minute ago actually makes sense. Where people meditate, there are some investigations that I go to where I will actually sit, touch the building, the surrounding, so I can connect with the location, so I can receive more. And then there's some where I won't even fucking do it. Trans-Allegheny, I wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
Because the
Right.
perception as you walked in was already intense as it was. To connect with the building would be opening that file and seeing the data that creates it.
Yeah, and a lot of those altered states, like when the kids do the choking game or when people do psychedelics, brain activity in areas of the brain are reduced extremely. And through that, whatever is enforcing that boundary that separates us is more permeable.
That's when it becomes
and weakened. So that's how you have a greater perception of it. Even like what I wanted to say, Todd's question was about
Tesla.
Yeah, Tesla, Edison, et cetera, closer to universal consciousness that allow them to be. So I think I know what you're saying, and I'm only going to nitpick words on this show just because it really does make a difference how we frame things. So when you say closer, it's an appeal to proximity or distance, and we're all part of universal consciousness. So if Chris is more perceptible and he picks up on more stuff like that than we do, which we know he does, he's not closer to it. He's more permeable or more open from his dissociative boundary. And that is something that has been studied where they did have people that were mediums tested with EEG, fMRI, and they had people pretending to be mediums. And the parts of the brain that were part of complex thought and cognitive higher function, those parts of the brain with the real mediums were reduced. The people who were pretending to be mediums had higher activity in those areas. So there is something that it looks like from a second person perspective to be an actual medium. There is something that looks like. So that would be my explanation for what Chris would experience. It's not being closer to it. It's being more open.
Yeah. So the answer I would say is yes, but not closer to universal consciousness, but more porous. So what's the word you always?
Permeable, porous.
Permeable.
Mm-hmm.
I have to permeable.
And what you just said, Ron, makes absolute sense. It's like, as an example, Tony and Cherie have seen this when we were doing the Aho Hospital and we thought somebody was inside.
Mm-hmm.
My personality switched.
Yeah.
My openness shut off the minute I thought there was a physical threat.
Mm-hmm.
I went from an investigator that was open, was hearing and feeling and sensing things, to when I thought there was a physical danger with inside the building, my personality switched. I'm a completely different person.
Yeah.
I would say that it absolutely happened exactly the way you think it happened, but I would explain it differently now. Under idealism, I would say you didn't shut it off. Your senses in that area were obfuscated by something else.
Huh.
Right? Your sensory input is usually what takes precedence over your perception on a daily basis. And when you go outside during the day, the stars you see in the night sky are still there.
Yeah.
You don't experience those. Because why? Because of the sunlight, the noise, the activity. There's things that are obfuscating that, blocking it out, and they're taking precedence in what your senses are feeding you, and that's where your focus is.
Right.
But they're still there. So your abilities are not gone or shut off. You're just, your senses were triggered by something in your environment.
And then
then your focus changed.
Yeah.
His focus changed. You're right. Yeah. He didn't lose any of the abilities, but his focus went from focusing on something felt or sensed to an actual physical threat in the building. And he refocused his attention from trying to sense something to footsteps, what direction they were going, pulling his gun, because he did all that.
Yep.
And then turned around all of us and said, "Stay here."
Right. So that's an instinctual thing, right? But then how does it stay enforced and you see that whole thing through? Because as people, the one thing that humans have is metacognition. It's one thing to be conscious. That means you experience. But when you know that you experience, when you're aware that you experience, that's metacognition, metaconsciousness. So you experienced something that made you think there was a survival issue going on. And then you focused on that. So now you're reflecting, you're introspecting on that threat. And that's your focus now. And that's what you're processing. And that's where your attention is. So all these abilities to pick up on spirits and other stuff does not have any relevance at the moment because you're in survival mode. You sensed it, you responded to it instinctively, and then you reflected on it and you were thinking about it. That's introspection. Then you kept experiencing it because you had something you needed to handle because survival for you and those in your tribe could have been at stake.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I would explain it. So I don't think your abilities they're there. They're not going anywhere.
Well, you know what the best part was? Nobody was in the building.
Yeah.
Mhm.
No one. But we all heard it. We all heard the footsteps. It sounded like they went running down a hall. Nobody there.
Yeah, and just to be clear too, because so we've been studying analytic idealism. I've been studying it for like 2 years. So we're not saying that we know for sure anything, but when you look at what we know in life, what we know in reality, what science tells us, which are regularities in nature, which we know are reliable, and then we try to explain all the stuff that we talk about and experience in the paranormal, as well as being in concert with that. Because if you're clashing with known laws of science, then there's something wrong with your theory. A philosophy or an ontology for reality should be able to coexist with everything science knows, because those are predictions and modelings of reality as it plays out, right? And then the beingness of something is separate from that. So it makes the most sense that the hard problem of consciousness is the difference between having the separation between consciousness, mind, and then physical matter as two separate things. Because there's nothing about any physical quantity in terms of which you can deduce, at least in principle, the qualities of experience.
Right.
So I want to talk the show, but man, he always has some good stuff. Open-minded is why you're there, but welcome in mind is something to use caution with. And I've actually talked to people that I've experienced stuff my whole life. So seeing, sensing, hearing stuff that is away from what we consider normal, to me, is not abnormal.
Mm-hmm.
So when people come to me and say, hey, I'm starting to pick things up, I'm starting to see something, should I open myself up? My best statement to them is, don't play with it unless you're ready to see something that scares the living shit out of you. Let me explain that to anybody I've ever said that to. I'm not saying it because what you're going to see is Hollywood scary. I'm not saying it is because it's going to scare the living shit out of you because there's a dead person standing in front of you. The reason I say that is it is going to change your perception of reality the second it happens.
Mm-hmm.
And most minds can't handle that, and that's why it's scary. It's a perception of reality to where your reality of what was safe and what was normal is our perception. This is what Ron and Lourdes are talking about with analytic idealism. Your perception of reality just got shot because now you are realizing you are seeing stuff that you have never seen before, and it scares the living shit out of most people because your cognitive function can't analyze it.
Right.
I agree.
That is what I mean when I tell people, be prepared to have the living shit scared out of you. It's not because it's anything that's going to harm you. It's anything that's going to hurt you. It's anything that's going to be Hollywood scary. Your perception of reality is going to change permanently forever when that happens.
Well, it does for so many reasons, because it breaks down everything you're taught. It breaks down science. It breaks down religion. It breaks down all the basic building blocks of what you believe life to be. And when you come across something that stretches those boundaries or far exceeds those boundaries, you have, like I said, you have to process that. You have to try to understand it. You have to be able to deal with it. And for some people, that's very difficult.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yep.
Is there any one of these we didn't touch?
Well, the one thing I think we didn't touch was communication.
And why would we do
These are forms of
I
And for anybody interested on the cell phone study done by the psychologist, this actually convinced this guy to the point to where he wrote a book called Death as an Altered State of Consciousness. Okay. And he talks about communication and the near-death experience. And he only did 21 people, but there was such compounding evidence that convinced him to write this book, where he even doubts materialistic thinking, which holds that there's only the oblivion upon death. He, as a psychologist and as a scientist that was doing the study to disprove the fact that it was actually something outside the realm of reality, perceived reality, convinced him to the point where he wrote the book and his materialism disappeared.
Yay. That's what I say to that.
Right.
That's great.
And materialism being the belief that there's a world out there outside of us that is exhaustively explained in quantities, that has no qualitative experience whatsoever, made up of physical matter that has standalone existence. That's what materialism says. But that's where, again, why we started leaning in the more we learned about idealism, and why we're speaking from, again, we don't know, but we've taken on an idealist perspective because it makes sense. If everything's mental, you don't have those problems. But with that physical standalone world, materialist or physicalist idea, you have to explain how physical matter out there, which does not have experiential states like the taste of a strawberry, the how it feels to be in love, doesn't have any of that. So how does physical matter, if your brain is physical and is a physical being thing, right? How does matter in your head create consciousness when that matter out there does not have experiential states? It's a contradiction. And it says that it's not, so the hard problem is not a problem to be solved. It's an insoluble problem that says that this ontology, this idea of reality doesn't work because it's running into a huge roadblock that you can't get around.
And Chris, I'm very similar to you. Like, I've had paranormal experiences all my life. It's just normal to me. I mean, I knew outside of me, it wasn't normal, but it was normal to me. So when we started studying analytic idealism and hearing of the one mind and everything is mental, I was like, it was like a ding. My life all of a sudden made sense. Like, it made, now I understood how I would have dreams and see certain things or whatever if everything is mental. And knowing that under analytic idealism, it makes paranormal normal. And I was like, okay, so all this time, my paranormal experiences were normal because that's how they felt to me. I've always had them. So, you know.
There you go. Thank you, Karen, for all your compliments tonight. Karen's awesome.
She is. No, everybody's awesome. And that's why I just wanted to preface that too, since we were having a panel discussion thing. And we're all getting deeply passionate about idealism. Because for me, it was exciting. Because it every time the more I learned it over the last couple of years, I kept waiting for the thing that went, oh, never mind. All this stuff that we believe is a bunch of bunk. It's not going anywhere. And it just made it more and more plausible. And it made it jive with science. It doesn't conflict with it. A non-dualist, one foundation for reality mental thing just explained everything. It allowed for everything. It didn't conflict with science. So we're really like, and we're trying to adhere to that with how we look at it, explain things. We've re-explained stone tape and psychometry through that lens because it allows those things to happen. The way that it's accepted now violates all kinds of laws of physics. And that's one of the conflicts, is that if you don't look at things as mental and you say that there is a physical standalone world out there, then a lot of these things that happen that we try to explain, that's why you lose the argument with the skeptics or cynics who throw physics and particle physics and whatever else at you, because you can't explain it that way.
Right.
Yay, I'm glad you feel normal. Yay, Karen.
Yes. and let me help some of the other people out there too that are watching. Guys, I've been a sensitive my whole life and everything that you hear me say on this show, but let me help you with the other portion of Chris, and these four know it, is I also compete with my analytic side. So I've been in law enforcement. I was in law enforcement for 10 years. I've been in operations management my entire career. I am very data analytic oriented. So I have dual mindsets that constantly compete with each other. So you don't see me, I am way overcritical about everything. If a simple answer to me is not enough, there's got to be more deep dive into it. And I know a lot of you out there are listening to the analytic idealism and you're listening to what we say on here. And some of you still have questions and some of you still, this doesn't make sense to me. Believe me, I live in the same world. I'm constantly competing in my own mind, from my professional life to the way my brain is trained to my paranormal life. All of it always collides. And that is why you will never hear me say I am a medium. I have psychic abilities. I will tell you I'm sensitive, and I will tell you my experiences. I will never come out and say I can predict the future. I can read things. I can read things sometimes, but not always are they right. And you can even ask Tony and Cherie and Ron and Lourdes on investigations. Sometimes I hold back on what I'm picking up because my interior mind competes with my extrasensory mind.
Yeah, and other times he says, "There's a woman in here," right on the recorder. She goes, "You're right."
Oh, sometimes I just spit it out. So, and the reason I brought that up is because I know there's probably people in the chat, like Karen loves what we're saying tonight, but there's also probably people in the chat that are watching tonight that are having compounding interests that are competing with each other. You're not the only ones. Some of us have the same thing going on at the same time. And it's not that I don't 100% believe in what we talk about on here. It's I'm always competing with myself in my mind because I'm a critical thinker constantly.
It's a large pill to swallow, you know. Everybody's working under
Yeah.
materialism. It's a shock to the system.
Yeah, and actually, that's the beauty of analytic idealism is that the analytic part of it thinks through, and that's where you don't run into problems. When the stuff that you pick up and sense, if you do the deep dive, it's very in league with Occam's razor, right? The fewest theoretical entities to explain something that's reasonable, that seems to make sense, has support. Right, that's what you should lean into instead of inventing elements of an explanation just to flesh it out so it makes sense and fits your belief. And I think all the stuff that you experience, if you look at it through that lens, no conflict.
Yep.
Good point. Yeah, well said.
And that is why we call ourselves paranormal researchers, paranormal investigators, and not paranormal experts. Right? Mm-hmm. Paranormal professionals. That this is my personal point of view. Doesn't reflect on anybody else in the chat or anybody else on the show.
The term
words
expert
just piss me off to no end because nobody is an expert. Nobody knows all the answers.
Right. The term expert defines that you know everything aspect of something. That's what an expert is. Somebody that you can ask any question about what they're talking about and they can answer it. They will know the answer. Paranormal is not like that. Not only is there not someone out there that knows it all, we don't even know what we don't know. And only through research, theorizing, and philosophy can those paths be drawn out to say, does this work? Does this not work? And that's what we do because we don't even know the variables involved that we could be going up against. We don't know.
No, that's brilliant, and I love that he brought that up because again, when we try to base it in idealism, that's the starting point. Can we explain this with what we do know? Do we need to invent things or allow in the explanation what are called the hidden variables, unknown things that are influencing or somehow creating a certain step or result in the process, but with no clue what it is, and we don't even have an in principle guess at what it is. And that's a lot of that happens in the paranormal. We have these axiomatic beliefs that we've held on to forever, and no way to support them except the ghosts just know how to do it. That's just how it is. And I'd love to see actual research done into these things. Like, I don't think you can capture and display at a museum a portal, but if you could find data consistent with activity that's called a portal and maybe correlate enough stuff to it, then you could start making an argument for all these portals that are everywhere that people say, right? And it's similar to, again, talking about perception. Lightning is not an atmospheric disturbance. It's the second person perspective of the disturbance. Fire is not combustion. It's the extrinsic appearance of combustion.
Right.
So if there are portals and these things are functioning and happening, what's there for us to detect, or how can we somehow maybe measure a result from it and then start correlating that to activity with manifestations that are visual, or, and start putting the puzzle together that way.
Keep chatting. I'll be right back.
I think I believe
I could comment now on what you said, Ron.
That's funny.
Oh, yeah, I believe as far as with the portals and stuff like that, I don't think there's actual portals, but that people see something that to them seems to be like a portal, and that's the word that is used, because what other word can you use to describe what you just saw? And maybe that's how it gets into, people start getting to, there's a portal here and there's a portal there. But maybe it's because they see something that appears to them to be a portal, but maybe there is no actual portal. Right? I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's possible. But I mean, I think there's so many variables involved, including defining language, how it's used, with the inception of them understanding what they saw. If it's truly something that we're saying is not, well, let me rephrase that. Something not normally seen is all I'm going to say. Not paranormal, not whatever, because those terms, like you said, we don't define it as that anymore. But if they've seen something they are not used to seeing, and then they try to rationalize what happened, what they saw, how it was functioning, how they felt, the interaction that came from the experience, all that's a lot to take in what, maybe 10 seconds or less that it happened. So, there's so many variables in that equation alone. That did they see what they thought they saw? Did their shock or amazement of what they saw influence what they now believe they experienced? So there's so many variables within just understanding what that experience was to them, and did they perceive what happened or what they think happened. And that's part of the difficulty in dealing with anything within what we call paranormal.
So is this kind of like if you see some shadow figure or any apparition, is that like your conscious, like, I don't know how you put that. Like if you see a shadow figure or an apparition, how is that with your consciousness saying?
Well, your consciousness is going to react to it based on how you feel about it. It's your physical senses, your sense of sight, your perceptions, and whether that be extrasensory, did you really see it with your eyes, or did you see it in your mind? But the fact of the matter is you felt, you experienced something, you perceived it, regardless of through which sense. That perception influenced on that moment in that space and time what you experienced. So you had that experience regardless of what sense perceived it. You can't take the experience away. It happened, and it happened.
So it happened, you had a paranormal.
Well, now you're defining now you're crossing terms. Whether it's paranormal, whether it's normal, whether it's,
I'm trying to understand the consciousness, and also when, the reason why we're doing investigation, paranormal investigation is, okay, you see a shadow figure, you see an apparition. Is that a consciousness, or is that a paranormal, or what is that?
You're explaining about 10 different things.
I want to understand.
No, I understand. I understand. The perception of it is still real. You perceived it. You saw it. That's real. Perception is the only way we get any experience in life. It's all through perception, regardless of how it happens, whether it's touch, feel, sight, sound. That's how we perceive things. If you saw something, you had a perception. You saw it. So that experience to you is now real. How you deal with what you saw, that has to do with your internal consciousness and your mind working it out. That's going to be different for everybody, depending on what they believe, how they feel, if it was dangerous or they just got the best experience in the world to perceive it. So that I can't explain. Now you're saying, well, was that paranormal? Well, what we're saying is what is classified as paranormal isn't paranormal at all. It's normal activity that happens all the time. And there's nothing para about it. It's just, it hasn't been understood, classified, or studied to the point where science is willing to say it's there. But the shortest path that Ron was talking about can't divert all over the screen. Well, if this happens, well, then you got to go over here, and then we're going to go around here. You know, we take a straight line to say, well, if consciousness survives death, consciousness is the ontological primitive. It's the one thing that is there, will always be there. You get disassociated from universal consciousness when you're alive, and then that information goes back to universal consciousness when you die, when your body dies, not consciousness.
No, that was a great explanation. Paranormal is what we call, again, that's operating under, it gets confusing because we're so used to operating under a physicalist mentality, which is that there's a world out there that's solid and separate and outside of consciousness. So when you see these things or have these experiences, whoa, that's not normal, it's paranormal. But if everything is within consciousness, which it is, we believe it is, then it's quite normal. The only other exception to perceptions being how you get your experiences is endogenous states. Right? If you experience hunger, that's not something that comes through perception. You don't perceive food and have hunger. You're hungry anyway. Fear, love, a lot of those things can either be influenced, but they're endogenous feelings. Those are things that emanate from within your inner phenomenal conscious life.
But you'd still perceive the feelings of hunger. You'd perceive the feelings of your stomach rumbling. So that threw me off a little bit. I guess I'm a little.
It's not a sensory input. If you had blindfold on in a dark room with airtight sound, no smell, no taste, no touch, you could still feel hunger. So your taste buds, your smell, your visual, your audible, there's nothing being triggered. The feeling comes within. It's an endogenous state. It's not something that you perceive. Now, if you're talking about focusing or thinking about it, that's metacognition. That's knowing that you experience it and then reporting back to yourself that you're hungry, which is a human thing to have metacognition. That's why we say I am hungry, not I am hunger.
No, that makes perfect sense. But I still perceive I'm hungry. If you blocked out my hearing, blocked out my sight, blocked out my sense of smell, I could still perceive I'm hungry.
Well, and for those of you that have never experienced Tony Rathman, I'm a hard one to argue with this man. Because the man is always fucking hungry.
Always.
Yes.
Always.
Yeah.
And we don't have any clips tonight, so there was no time for me to eat. So, yeah, I'm feeling hungry.
Yeah. But hunger is not, you don't perceive it, you experience it.
What's the difference?
Perception is something you get from an extrinsic stimulus, something from outside of your consciousness. You perceive the outside world.
Okay, if my consciousness is separate from my body, I'm perceiving my body saying it's hungry.
So your body is not separate from your consciousness. Your body is the extrinsic appearance of your consciousness, your individuated consciousness from the outside perspective. The only time you see your body
from the outside perspective, yes, not from mine.
So you don't see your body unless you look down at it or you look in a mirror.
Hunger is something that comes within. It's a quality within.
Yeah, it's an endogenous quality from within.
Yeah, it's an endogenous.
You can't perceive. If you could perceive hunger, how would you perceive my hunger? I would have to tell you.
Right. I can only perceive mine. Right. Correct. I can't perceive yours.
All right.
I would know after not feeding you for 3 days, you're probably hungry, but I can't experience it.
The foaming of the mouth and the wanting to tear your throat out might be an indication.
That's fair.
And really, I mean, scientists knew that this knows since what, the 1940s, I think it was, that the material world is not standalone existence. I think it's since the 1940s or something like that.
Physicality arises from measurement. If you don't measure something, it doesn't have quality. It doesn't have quantities and numbers and measurements and all that. And then when you measure it, it reveals those things to you. Physicality exists upon measurement. Particles are not an actual thing. Particles are behaviors of the field of subjectivity. And even fields are all just like everything else. Those are just they're theoretical models.
Right. It's not an actual field.
Meant to understand and explain the nature of reality. And field theory seems to allow for more of of what we know. It doesn't clash with general relativity.
Right. Well, a perfect example would be if you were to look at Tony Rathman. He is not a fat man, right?
I'm getting there.
So let me give you an example. If you stand me next to Tony Rathman, I'm 6 foot tall. Tony's 6'1", right? We are very similar in height.
Yeah.
But if you see me standing next to Tony, you assume that I can out-eat the man. But that's the perception. The perception is Tony doesn't eat as frequently as Chris does, because Chris is a big guy. I'm a big, bulky man, right? But in all reality, I eat maybe an eighth of what Tony eats.
I eat literally. I will get up. I will go to work.
20 times.
The second I get to work, everything I pack comes out. It gets
right,
and I will literally eat from the second I sit down at my desk. The only time I'll quit is to go make my lunch.
Right.
Have a nice spread.
The point I'm trying to get to is
the only thing that makes him happy going to work, he's excited for his lunch.
I will literally say to her, I'm not going to have a good day. I've got nothing good to pack for lunch. and I'm not talking like people would pack a sandwich and that's lunch.
He's like going,
I got everything.
He's like going
I've got
camping.
fruits,
He's
nuts,
not going to go hungry.
dried fruits. I've got homemade glazed walnuts. I mean, cheese.
But perception of reality. Some of you will experience this at Gettysburg Bash when you see Tony and I standing next to each other. You will look at Chris and think Chris eats like a fucking ox at the Oxbow Saloon pulling a wagon. I don't. I eat one meal a day.
Yeah, that's true. He does one meal a day.
Me too.
And it's not like I eat a meal that would pull a freaking wagon. I eat just a regular meal. I eat a very light meal. But the perception and reality, the perception versus reality is you look at Tony, you look at me, and you think I eat way more than Tony does. When the reality is Tony eats 10 times.
I eat all the time.
Tony makes me want to throw up when I watch him.
The hunger within takes over.
Perception of reality and hunger. It's all a perception of what, like, let me try and help explain. Tony is a severe diabetic, for anybody that does not know. He has a monitor on his hip right now.
Yeah.
If Tony does not eat, his blood sugar drops. His cognition drops. He sounds drunk at times. Right?
Can happen.
So Tony has to constantly eat to maintain his sugar levels. It's
it's more than that, though. If I eat too much and don't have the right amount of insulin, then it goes high and causes all sorts of damage. So it's really tricky, and I found it's easier to eat small amounts all day long, although some of my amounts aren't that small.
I was going to say, they're not that small, fucker.
But it helps that balance and knowing what you've taken for insulin and that you're,
right.
Rather than now I got to get.
But the perception, if you go with the consciousness, the perception is Tony has a physical condition that causes him to eat. Chris has no physical condition that causes me to eat, but I look like I eat more.
Yeah, and not to nitpick, but not to muddy the waters too. That's a value judgment. The perception would be to see you two, and then from that point, you're making an assessment. You're making a value judgment based on what people look like and what you know about food and how they eat and what you think the result would be. But that doesn't. It's not a statement towards perception as much as it is interpretation. The perception would still be you look like you and he looks like him. And then from that point forward, you're processing value judgments based on what you're perceiving. But it's not an alteration of perception.
Yeah, I guess that's true. But as long as I can still eat, I'm okay with it.
I know.
So for everybody watching, I'm blaming the fact that I don't look like Chris Helmsworth on analytic idealism. It's the consciousness. It's the perception. I'm just kidding.
Yes.
And that's what I'm going with. I don't care what anybody says.
That's true.
Yeah, that's very low sugar. If it gets to that point, though, it's super low and
so when you
probably a major health concern. The brain runs on sugar just like the body does. when the sugar gets so low that the brain is struggling to function, that's real close to coma and death. You don't want that to happen.
No.
So if you guys talking to Tony and he's not really making any sense, give him candy.
Now he's going to do it on purpose, so we get.
I know. Every time he wants candy.
Ooh, they got peanut butter cups.
See,
You guys think it's a funny situation, but there have been times on investigations where I went, Tony, stop what the fuck you're doing. Let's go eat.
Yeah.
Not me. Tony.
Yeah, he's done that. Yeah. A lot of times other people can pick it up before I can, and it's because I've had it so long. My God, I've had it since I was 14 or 15. I'm now 54, so it's been a long time.
Jesus, you're old.
But yeah, Cherie will tell me right away, go eat something, it's low. And I'm like, no, it's not. Yeah, she's right. She's always right.
And
Mary Beth had a really good question, and then
once again we went off the rails a little bit.
preceded by a comment.
Wait,
That one
really
right
good.
there.
And I don't know if it's so. That's her question. Why do we wait last after death? But then before that, she explained something, which I'd actually like to see what everybody's thoughts are. I know that there have been. It's a very nominal difference, if I'm not mistaken, with that. And I'm not sure if it's something that could be attributed to metabolistic function, or because they're trying to. The suggestion is that it's trying to account for the weight of the soul, right? But I don't, if there's not, we don't know of any self-contained body of energy that we'd identify as a soul. And soul,
or with weight,
right?
Any body of energy does not have a physical mass weight.
Well,
the only thing I can think of would be that after the heart stops beating, the blood circulating, so it weighed less after death was what
Yes.
it said?
Yes, nominal but consistent, she said, and that's what I had heard too.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of how that might happen.
Body function releases were accounted for, right?
That's interesting.
It was, I've read that. It's a very small difference, but there is a difference.
I mean, I don't know, because, and this is, I thought, and I could be wrong, correct me if I am, but when someone dies, that's that dead weight, and it tends to be heavier, no?
Yeah.
So let me get out of the metaphysical portion and go back into the physical portion.
Dead weight.
Well, well,
Sure. I found that humorous.
The term dead weight is
Yeah, I know.
it's a physical term because a dead body will feel heavier than the person did when they were alive, and it is a physical function. And the reason it's a physical function is I will explain this to you. Let's take a window, for example. If you take a window that weighs 350 pounds, one man, I can teach you how to physically lift that window. One man can physically lift a 350-pound window by himself. Now you take a 350-pound bag of sand. One man cannot physically lift that himself. And the reason because of that is the disbursement of weight, rigid versus flaccid.
That
Right?
makes sense.
So flaccid weight is distributed unevenly and harder to pick up and harder to maneuver the leverage needed compared to a rigid weight. And
Okay,
that's where the term dead weight comes from.
That makes sense, Chris. But the weight didn't change in your example, whereas the body weight did. 350 pound window, 350 pound bag of sand, still 350 pounds.
Correct.
A live body versus a dead body, the weight changes. That's the only difference, I think, in what you explained.
I don't think there's much of a difference.
No, it's small, and Tony's correct too. That's Newtonian physics. Right? If you drop a rock, or if you drop 200 pounds of rocks or 200 pounds of feathers, you're not going to have a difference in speed because it's the same weight. You're going to have the same gravitational effect.
Right. No, Mary, energy does not have weight.
So according to Google, A dead body has no weight difference compared to a live body. However, a live body is able to do things that a dead body cannot, such as distribute the weight to change the center of gravity, which is
What
rigid.
you said. Which is what you said.
Wait, did
That makes sense.
Roger just say all forms of energy have weight?
Yeah, he said energy has mass. Mass equals weight. Mass does not necessarily equal weight.
Right.
Weight is a calculation that's done through measurement. Mass material stuff has mass, spin, charge, right? It's not necessarily weight. I think Tony's correct.
So mass and weight may seem like the same thing, but in fact, they're two different measurements. Mass always stays the same, but weight can change depending on how much gravity is acting upon the object.
Absolutely correct. But does mass have weight? Because Roger's equation just said it did. If it does, I am not from. Yeah, energy has mass. Mass
Google
weight.
Well, mass doesn't equal weight. Yeah, I don't agree with that.
And energy having mass, how much does 5 kilohertz weigh?
Say that again.
How much does 5 kilohertz weigh? 5 kilohertz is a form of energy. How much does 5 kilohertz weigh?
Yeah, I'm.
See how it gets muddy a little bit. So I don't know that, and proving that energy and mass can be the same thing. The problem is that energy gets applied so unilaterally on a bunch of different things that it becomes muddy with trying to define that.
Yeah, I agree.
So according to
if
scientists,
I'm missing something, I feel terrible, but I just.
Yeah, but it's not. I think someone already proved Einstein wrong with that. I believe.
Do you know what the electric plant here would weigh with all the air conditioners running when it's 120? I mean, how can that have weight to it?
You read that, right?
Yeah. Einstein was proving is that energy and mass could be the same thing.
Yeah, but I think
so. Energy and mass, yes.
Simple definition of mass is the quantity of matter within a given object.
Right, and that's one of the ways that they account for the discovery of dark matter because of gravitational lensing. Right, you have something that makes light appear to be bending around something. So there's one element to it. Light may not have resting weight.
Mass is a fundamental measurement of how much matter an object contains. Weight is the measurement of gravitational force upon that object.
Right. Right.
So the difference between mass and weight is gravity.
Right.
Yep.
And gravity is a convenient fiction. Gravity is what nature appears to be doing. Right. The French mocked it for 50 years until they accepted it. And actually, Einstein's fabric of space-time supplanted the same phenomenon as the explanation for it. That it wasn't gravitation, it wasn't spooky stuff happening at a distance. It was instead space-time being bent by the mass of something.
Yeah.
So Jenny said, what's the other part that she said?
Soul weight 21 grams, right?
All energy has mass, but for example, light has weight, but you can measure it. Yeah, but are you saying then that mass equals weight, Jenny? Or because, see, I think that's what we're discussing, and I'm not sure. So I mean, I see that, I understand that, but I'm wondering.
Go back to where she said with the soul weighs, because that one really caught my attention.
21 grams.
How would they know that?
Well, because what they're attributing to the 21 gram difference is the soul.
I mean, life and death. Yeah.
Right. So this is where we're naming things that language makes us for the purpose of being able to discuss them. So there's a 21 gram difference. It seems to be consistent. And so
they fight the hard problem of consciousness, but they can tell you what it weighs.
Well, that's not conscious. It's the soul is supposed to be our individual.
Okay, now that's terminology.
Right.
Now
that's my point. That's my point. Right.
So 1 pound is equal to almost 456 grams. So if you take 21 grams in that could be that could be attributed to loss of body functions, a dead body will immediately release any urine, It will immediately release any feces within the body. And then it also starts to release any sweat or any toxins from any orifice that it chooses. So that 21 grams could be the difference between, I mean, you would have to study every dead body on the planet to determine that the soul is 21 grams. Because that 21 grams could be a variance from person to person.
Which was going to be my next question, if that was like a consistent number that they were finding, or, you know, you're right.
I would really like to see the study that determined that 21 grams was attributed to the soul, considering the fluids and the excrement that comes from a body once it passes.
After I've eaten, I can lose a couple of pounds just from...
But 8 a.m. in the morning after coffee?
Exactly.
I'm not contesting the fact that there's a 21 gram difference, but there's nothing to support the idea. I mean, the soul is what we call our individuated consciousness, but now we're giving it discrete boundaries as something that we can have some kind of a parameter to or measure.
Exactly. That's what I said.
Right. So I don't think you can measure or weigh a soul. I think you can measure a state change, right? When something changes, if you heat up water, there's state changes. There's probably measurable aspects of the process because you have a state change. And if we're dissociated states that are individuated minds of one universal consciousness, then we would have what seems to be discrete boundaries. But just because you can attribute numbers to it, for example, like Dr. Castro would always say, right? If you have a ripple on a lake, it has angular momentum, it has height, width, speed. You could probably calculate a mass to it. But there's nothing to the ripple but the lake. You can't take it off of the lake and bring it home. So it's the behavior of the field. It's what the field is doing. So I think that there's a state change that happens at death, and something accounts for this consistent 21 gram difference. But
that's what I was right there.
Yeah, but there's not a soul. What does a soul consist of? What are the elementary particles? What are the constituent parts of the soul that we know? So how do they know they're not measuring something else?
Right. So when somebody says soul, I contribute to the consciousness that we've been talking about, right? The consciousness that comes from the inner body, right?
Me too.
You've relieved of all perceptions. You're relieved of the perception of this state of being, right? And that is what I consider the soul, is the consciousness. Now, science has stated that your conscious mind is still active once the body stops and is dead, that your consciousness still sees, computes, or your brain, whichever one you want to look at, for 5 to 7 minutes after the body's expired. 5 to 7 minutes is a 2-minute variable.
Mm-hmm.
You would have to weigh thousands upon thousands and thousands of bodies within that 5 to 7 minutes to determine at any point that consciousness weighs 21 grams. And then then it's just it's a state of measure. It's not a consciousness. It's just a perception of when the body's consciousness finally shut off. So how can you really determine that 21 grams? The hypothesis that soul had mass, and I think only one of the 6 subjects lost 21 grams, not to the best study. There you go.
You see?
So they only did 6 subjects on that. So that's...
And only one. She said only one.
So this is, and I love Jenny. Jenny comes up with some great facts, but this is a perfect example of science trying to explain that the soul has weight when you've only measured 6 subjects. And in what time period did you measure that? When you believe science says the consciousness is still alive for 5 to 7 minutes after the body expires, when did those 6 people get measured to come up with that 21 grams? That's a very minuscule data collection to come to that determination.
Right. And even like that, like consciousness equals spirit or soul. Consciousness is what it is to be something. There's something it is to be you. It's not something it is to be the table. But that's what consciousness is. And then in historically, the what was called the psyche was synonymous with the soul. So there's different ways to refer to our individuated consciousness. But what happens is that when you give them different names, then they take on characteristics and lives of their own that are separate. Now, because it's a soul, now suddenly we're able to measure it, and it has discrete boundaries, and we can weigh it. See what I mean? So it gets out of hand a little bit. It goes a little bit beyond what we can speak to.
Yeah, but to me, consciousness, soul, spirit, it's all the same thing. It's consciousness.
You're measuring as a form of energy and not, say, pounds or kilograms.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what he's referring to there. You're measuring. So when you measure a form of energy, like if you measure a radio frequency, you'll measure it and you'll say it's 100 kilohertz.
So let's go back to this one.
But 100 kilohertz doesn't have weight.
So source of gravitational field, so they could say that a box of light weighs more than a box without light. Here's the problem with that study. Thermal variables. Heating and cooling will change the mass and weight of an object in a gravitational pull.
Yep.
So if you have a box with light that weighs more than without light, values that the light's providing into the mass of the box.
Yeah, you'd have to know the control factors that were put into running those weight tests. I mean, I understand what Roger's saying, and he's correct, but there's also a contradiction between measuring energy, like in kilohertz, and physical weight.
Right.
That's where I'm struggling. But it seems that the audience is really into the tonight's show. They're asking question after question. And I just realized we are 3 minutes away from 2 hours.
Oh, wow.
I just noticed.
So we should probably let the audience go, but
it appears that the hosts were into the show too.
Yes, they were.
There will be part 2 discussion.
Yes.
And guys, by any means, with us debating some of the stuff that you've put on here with science, you're going to struggle putting scientific facts in front of this group for 2 reasons, and then we'll let you guys go for the night. And we really appreciate it. This has been a fun show. But there's 2 reasons that science debunks itself. 1, theoretical science stops when it proves its theory. They don't continue to chase the variables. Theoretical science stops. Remember that. They stop when they've proved their theory. They don't disprove any other variables that can discount their theory. Once their theory is proved, they stopped and they produce the results and publish them for everybody to see. That's why it's called theoretical science, right? And that's where we have issue with science, because science, if you guys haven't been paying attention, doesn't really pertain to a lot of the paranormal stuff that we talk about, especially when you throw science into analytic idealism. Consciousness cannot be measured by any means. At least that any of us I know. None of us understand that. No.
That's correct. Science. The reason we like analytic idealism is that science and everything it tells us exists concurrently with it. They're not in conflict. It's a philosophy. It's the one worldview that everybody runs with and accepts, whether they think about it or not. Materialism. That's the one when you get into the paranormal stuff where you start having conflicts with science, because science can't measure the weight of your thoughts. It can't give you the length of your love, right? So there's experiential states and consciousness stuff that's not applicable to that. But it's I wouldn't say that science doesn't, science is extremely valuable. It's just when we're talking about a philosophy, it's a belief in defining reality. And then if the belief in reality conflicts with what science has shown us as regularities, then there's something flawed with that philosophy.
Correct.
And idealism doesn't seem to have those problems, but physicalism does.
Right.
Correct.
Well said.
All right, guys, this has been a really fun show. If you haven't noticed, we've changed the platform a little bit. And the reason we've changed the platform a little bit is we want to bring you more stuff that you guys want to see and that we like to talk about, so we make our show interesting. Have we gone away completely from evidence? No. You're going to see some coming up here in the near future. We've got some bookings and stuff for the people that's going to show their evidence. Every once in a while, you're going to see us have discussions like this. Every once in a while, you're going to see us have friends of ours come on, people that we know, people that we love that have investigated, and they have evidence to show for you guys to see, because we're not going to completely get away from that. But we are going to talk about things that you guys want to hear about. We're going to talk about things that we like to hear about, because it's our show and we like doing it. So give you guys a heads up for future broadcasts. We will be back next week. We will put the promo out before Friday, because on Saturday, Audra and I are heading to Florida for vacation. So you will not see Audra and I next week, but you will see these four you see here. And then the following 2 weeks, we will not be here after that. So we will be here for the 15th, the following 2 weeks, the 22nd, the 29th. We will all be on vacation or traveling. You will see us all 6 at Gettysburg Bash. You will see the Rathmans, and you will see Ron and Lourdes. They have a room at Gettysburg Bash with the Staticom project behind you. They will be doing Staticom all day on Saturday for you guys to see. And I'm sure we'll get some Staticom in Saturday night at some point. We have no problems taking over rooms. If you guys have been paying attention. But you will get to see all 6 of us.
Yeah, that's so nice of them.
Thank you, Todd and Carmela.
Yeah, thank you, everybody, for showing up. We can't wait to see those of you that will be at Gettysburg Bash. Thank you for listening to our talk about afterlife, after-death communication. I like to call it afterlife.
I never heard communication.
Todd and Carmel have a special delivery for Chris.
I think we know what that is.
Yes, there are some very hard to get alcoholic beverages in North Carolina, because North Carolina is very strict on their alcohol laws. So I shipped, and Todd and Carmela got me some stuff that I've been trying to get for a while now. I'm not an alcoholic. I'm practicing. I don't go to meetings. So with that being said, Gettysburg Bash will be fun. Audra and I will see you guys in about 3 weeks.
3 weeks. Yeah.
These 4 will see you guys next Monday. Guys, Afterlife Communication, no matter what you believe in, no matter what you watch, no matter what percentages you get from the studies that these scientists and psychologists have done, remember, the only way to capture that is to get out there. Make sure you're doing the research. Make sure you're doing the investigation. But most of all, guys, stay haunted. We'll see you next time. Have a good night.
Can you give me a name? What's your name?